week. I know I'm a little early, but I wanted to make sure everything is properly working. I hope everybody can hear me just fine and see me just fine. I don't know how this is all coming out. How am I? We're doing things a little different this week. Maybe you can tell. First of all, everything, and we're a little early, so I'll be going over this again in about 6 minutes. But for those of you who are tuned in early, we are Wednesday's Wednesday's show. I managed to get in some LED lights. Here's one of them right here. Maybe you can see it right here. There's two of them. They're both like right here, and they're facing outwards like that. Because if they were to be put in my face, I'd be blinded. But thought we needed an upgrade in the lighting department, so we went into the Unfound budget, otherwise known as my wallet, and I got some new lights. And it wasn't a lot of money. I mean, if you can believe it, I got these lights. I forget what the shipping was, but I think the lights themselves were under $30. So, given the cost, they should have gotten these a while ago. But it was my assistants who finally said, you know what, Ed, it's time to upgrade in the lighting department. So that's what I did. And so this is what we now have. Now we got rid of that yellow ish thing that we had going on for a long time, pretty much since I moved to this place. And it's really because this room, the walls, as you can see, are yellow. And in addition, this lamp that is right here, that is on right now, even though it has an LED bulb in it, it has a lampshade on it that makes it yellow. And even if you take the lampshade off, it still does not give off the proper coloring. So, thanks, fishing. So this is why we needed to do some change-ups. And this is what you get. And it looks pretty good to me, and my hair is looking okay. Who do we have in here early? Once again, we still have 3 minutes to go. We got Katie, Christine, Carrie, Heather, Antonia, Gail, Kathy, Laura, Jasmine, Fishing, and Cherie. Got a lot for you tonight, as you would predict. So we'll get to it when we're ready. The other thing you will notice is that there is no watermark down in the. There's no Wirecast being used tonight. You can see the little Unfound watermark, which is something new that's from Natasha has figured out how to do that. But you will see that in the other corner, there is no Wirecast. And the reason is we're not using Wirecast anymore. Talking it over with Natasha, I figured out that instead of using streaming on YouTube, I'm now using just straight up webcam. There's like two choices, and I really don't even know what the differences are. But when you pick the webcam selection, which I could never have guessed, you don't need to use the third-party programs to stream the show. So there you go. So those are the two big changes for this week. And really with using just the webcam instead of the streaming, it certainly makes a lot things easier on my end. And because once again on Sunday evening for the think tank, I once again had a problem with Wirecast. And that's what led me to, on Monday, talk to Natasha about it, because she, new assistant, knows a lot about YouTube. We finally talked it through, and we figured out that just using webcam would allow me to just go straight up and not use any third-party programs, which the other good thing is it cuts down on the delay. I used to tell you that when I would say something, you would not hear it or see it on the video until about 20 seconds later. Whereas now there's a little bit of a delay, but only a couple seconds, maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds, something like that, which I'm hoping will make for some better discussions. So there you go. And it is now 9 o'clock, and maybe a lot of people will be tuning in, not realizing that we got in here early. Angela, hello. How are you doing this evening? And Concha and Lauren, or Laura, pleasure to have all of you tonight for this live show. As you can see, things look a little different, and I think that the look and the streaming of the program is going to be better now that we've gotten some of these issues straightened out. And Angela, okay, so we got started. I can start answering questions. We can get right into this. Angela says, has anyone here ever heard of any studies stating the most frequent reason for people going missing? You know, Angela, that is a very good question. And, you know, studies on disappearances are very difficult to do because missing persons cases are unsolved. So it's hard to say. I would say that the most frequent reason that people go missing is murder. These are murders that people have gotten away with them, at least now. Maybe in the future, some of these missing persons cases, you know, will be solved, and then we'll find out that they actually are murders. But Angela, I have to tell you that I personally believe that a large majority of the cases that Unfound is covered are murders. I'm willing to guess that some of the ones that we think are murders might be something else, maybe like Crystal Morrison's case that we now know that was not a murder, although I, along with a lot of other people, thought it was, or at least an overdose of some type. It was not a murder or a hot shot or anything like that. So I'm going to guess that maybe a few of the other cases that we've covered we think are murders, or maybe aren't. But I still believe that a large majority of the cases that Unfound is covered, which I think is representative of missing persons cases as a whole, gotta believe that a large majority of them are murders. Carrie says, I have not heard of any that comes out and states what is most frequent, just that stranger abduction is less likely. Yes. Elizabeth, thank you. Like the non-yellow background, Ed. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think it looks pretty good too. Just, you know, I'm still messing around with the lighting and seeing, you know, because it can get really bright real quick. Woo. Wow. Okay. So I have to turn these lights away. They are really bright, really, really bright. So I have to turn them away, and just a little sliver of the light is enough to properly light what we're trying to do here. So Angela, thank you for that question. That's a good one. So we got new lighting, we got new streaming going on that I think is going to be a lot better for everyone. If you don't know, it was a little cold here the last couple of days. It was actually, when I got up this morning, it was like 41 degrees here in Clearwater Beach. It eventually did warm up a little bit, but when my brother came down here today and we went to lunch, we went over to downtown, what you would call Clearwater Beach, for lunch. And I mean, we walked from the car into the restaurant, and we were like, man, we got to get in here, man. It's cold. And it's usually a place where you usually would sit outside to eat, but not today. Not today at all. So I actually had long pants on. I had a sweatshirt on, and it was a little chilly out there for sure, but it's supposed to warm up back into like the 60s by this weekend, which is good because I'm going to be playing in another disc golf tournament this weekend Mandy says today was brutal in Orlando. Brutal, Mandy? Wow, okay. Well, 41 degrees in Florida, I guess, is brutal, especially this area. Up in the Panhandle, it's more common that they get temperatures down into the low 40s and even in the 30s. But being down where I am, halfway down the peninsula, it's fairly rare. And it was windy too. Yes, Mandy, for Floridians, of course. Of course. So, but I think it's going to be warming up, and that's fine by me. But I couldn't, like my balcony out here, go out there windy and really chilly. The wind coming off the water. So there's that. The newsletter. Some people asked me, was there a January 2020 newsletter? There was not. I think I talked about that last week. But there will be a newsletter for February, which means it'll be coming out in a little more than a week. And please be looking for that if you are on the newsletter list. Heather says I got an echo. I don't know what to tell you about that, Heather. Let me try something real quickly. I don't know what to tell you about that, Heather. Let me try something. Oh, I do hear that now. Let me try that. Maybe that will be a little better. Don't know. There shouldn't be any echo. I'm sorry if you're hearing a little bit of one, but we'll see if that's any better. It's better now, Sheree? Okay. Maybe I had to turn that off. Okay. That was it. I had to turn off I have to mute the YouTube. Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know, Heather. Appreciate that. Had no idea. But the newsletter, be looking for that the middle of next week. Of course, February 1st. I will be sure. When is February? Let me see, 7/29. So that won't be, not next, like next Saturday, I guess, February 1st. So Groundhog Day is on a Sunday this year, man. It's going to be crazy in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. But be looking for that newsletter. And there wasn't one for January, as I've already explained, because we did an update episode, which is kind of like a big newsletter. And really, with my dad here, did not have as much time as I usually do to work on something like that. And I will try to make up for it this month. So if you're on the newsletter list, you'll be getting one. If you don't think you're on the newsletter list, please contact me privately at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com, and I will put you on the list. So there you go. I want to mention something I mentioned maybe before we got started at 9 o'clock, that you will notice there is now that little watermark down in what I would call the right-hand corner of the video, and that is something that Natasha, who's been working very hard on Unfound's YouTube channel, putting up new videos, kind of updating everything, just doing these little tweaks and things to maximize the viewer ship, and she's been monitoring the downloads or views of some of the other new videos and things. So I want to send a shout out to her. And one of the little jobs that she did was putting the Unfound logo in the bottom right-hand corner, which to me is just like the coolest thing ever. So that was probably something, if I was still managing this on my own, I wouldn't have done, simply because I just don't have the time. But I'm glad that she has certainly stepped up to handle quite a few things. And I think that she's starting to put some of the videos in playlists. And there you go. She's very motivated, and I love people like that. So, I know that we don't talk, if you're not on YouTube for like the think tank or the show, maybe you don't even go to YouTube for Unfound stuff unless I have some video that I might do once in a while for an episode if I think a map or something needs to be explained. I think maybe the last time I did that was back in December. But maybe you should think about maybe visiting the YouTube channel, the Unfound podcast YouTube channel a little bit more, because I think you'll be noticing some changes and some upgrades and things like that. So there you go with the YouTube videos. Let's talk about phone call recording. I think what you got to hear last Friday was a difference between the old way of recording, at least the way that I've been recording interviews from like October until recently, and then the new way, which was the last half of my interview with Gina Finara. The first half, like the first hour, was old way. Second half, or even more than half, was the new way. Now, see, this is my phone right here. And it used to be, I want to explain all this to you, is it used to be way back in the day, like most, 2/3 of the way through 2019, that I had an app on the phone that would just record the other person, the guest's words as the signal was coming into the phone before it got to my ear. That's the way the app used to work. Then Google decided it doesn't like people using their phones to record phone calls, and that app stopped working that way. So then what I had to do, the way the app started to work, was then the only way it could record the other person's voice is by using the speaker on my phone. When the voice would come out, then the phone would hear it and record it. That's why the quality of my guests' voices and volume decreased so much. Or that's why it did that. And of course, what I had to do is I really had to bump everybody up. And that's why on some of those phone calls, some of those interviews that you heard in late 2019 into 2020, you can hear the person, but there is a hiss. And that's because I have to pump up the volume so much, and then you start to get distortion and everything else. Well, now what I figured out I can do is I'm just using the speakerphone and making their thank you, Whitney, making their voice very loud. So now I do interviews like this. So it's coming out, their voice is much louder. My phone records it from this. Of course, we speak down here. The voice, the noise, the voices come out at the top, and then that's how things are getting recorded. And that is obviously getting a lot better results. It's still not as good as the way it used to be between like 2017 and about October 2019. It's still not good as that. I can't do anything about that. This is as good as it's going to get. But I think, especially considering the second half of the interview with Gina and then Friday's episode, which was recorded, the interview was recorded the same way. I think it's a great increase in the quality, and it just took some time to figure these things out, because Google really screwed over us who use these apps, and we have to get high quality audio for what we do. So I just wanted to explain that. A couple people asked me, hey, why was the first half and the second half so different this past week? Well, first of all, the interviews was done in two parts. I actually interviewed Gina first, the first part between Christmas and New Year's. And then the second part, I interviewed her just like 5 days before the episode came out. And that's in that period, I figured out how to record the interviews a different way. So the way you heard that second half of my interview with Gina is the way that interviews will be recorded from now on. Now, I should also say this is the way I have to record people when I talk to them for a first time and I have to get their permission to record the phone call. That is also the way I have to record them now. So Certainly makes it a lot easier for me now. I still have to bump up the volume and everything, but it's a much easier process now than it was before. But I thought you all needed an explanation, especially if you listened to last Friday's episode and was like, why did the first half of the interview sound so different from the second half? That is the reason. So there you go. I wanted to explain that all to you. Let's talk about, being that I just mentioned Gina and her interview and last Friday's episode. And JM's mentioning your sound quality is much better tonight. Well, JM, very early in the show tonight, I mentioned how I've changed up a couple things. I'm using the webcam feature on YouTube instead of the streaming selection on YouTube. And when you do that, when you pick webcam instead of streaming, you don't have to use a third-party program like Wirecast. You will notice in tonight's broadcast, there's no Wirecast thing down in this corner, a little watermark, because I'm not using it, and I won't be using it. And I think that's also what can be contributed to the better audio. So I appreciate you noticing that. And the lighting, JM, we got some new lighting in here too. So we're just stepping it up from last week. But the Jackson Miller poll, a large majority of you do not believe that Jackson went off the bridge. That does not mean that he didn't commit suicide some other way. It doesn't mean that he's still alive. It doesn't mean that he's deceased or anything else. But a large majority of you feel like I do, that he did not go off the bridge, not the day that he got to San Francisco or any other day after that. And I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that. Now, as far as the bridge documentary, I know that some of you told me it's just a little too rough to watch, and I understand that. But I'm hoping if you watched it, I hope you got a very good sense of what's going through people's minds when they do go to the bridge to jump, and the ramifications of that, and kind of the tendencies that these people have when they go to do that. And that's another reason that, for me personally, I don't believe Jackson went off the bridge because he acted different than these other people. So if you have not watched the bridge documentary yet, it's free on YouTube. All you have to do is do a search for it. And if you did watch it, I hope you got something. Of course, it's a very tragic, sad story because they do show people going off the bridge. They record that. That's very tough. But I certainly hope you learned something about suicide and specifically people who go to the San Francisco Bridge to commit suicide. Andy says, just realized my volume is half what it would normally be for the live show. I'm glad to hear that. Live and learn, still hoping to keep doing that myself. Gail, great job. Shri. I found it very interesting and definitely sad regarding the documentary. Carrie says, I couldn't watch it. I started, but only got a few minutes into it. Yeah. And Elizabeth says, tragic case. And Tonya says it was very tough. I agree. And I have to admit that The Bridge is not the kind of documentary that I would usually watch. You should all know that I'm the type of person that doesn't even like to watch those National Geographic things on animals with leopards, tracking down wildebeests. I can't even watch that. I realize that cats and lions and tigers and bears have to eat, but that doesn't mean that I have to watch it happening. And so I think that when I watch those videos, if I run across something like that, I have to tell you, I'm always rooting for the zebra, the wildebeest, the prey, and I'm not rooting for the predators. Just the kind of guy I am. So watching The Bridge, was not easy for me either, but of course I had to do it because that's what I do. So for those of you that thought it was a little too much, I get it. And there's no judgment from me. I understand it. Hello to you, Satin B. Nice to see you live too. Yeah, Carrie says it's just the suicide thing I couldn't handle. Kathy says, I hate it when the babies, cubs are killed. I know, I can't watch it either, Kathy. It's just, it's a fact of life. That's what happens here on Earth. And that's just the way it is. That doesn't mean I have to watch it. Once again, I realize those animals have to eat too. And they're doing just what is natural to them. It's not, they're not killing these other animals, for fun. It's just what they do. But that just doesn't mean I have to watch it. So, hello, Paula. Didn't see you in here tonight. Hello, Paula. How are you doing? So, if you haven't watched it yet, if you think it's something you want to learn about, then please do that. Now, along those lines, I think, I just came across this today, and once again, I think it's something. Hello, Christine. Hello, Angel. Something else that I think that we can learn about suicide. And because my perception after doing Unfound for as long as I have, and I'm not saying that I believe that a lot of the cases we've covered have been suicides. I don't believe that. I think there's some, but certainly not many. But I forgot about this, and you'd think that me being having a fascination with plane crashes, that I would have maybe brought this into the conversation a lot sooner. But maybe some of you will remember this this Alaskan Airlines plane that was stolen back in 2018 up in the state of Washington, Puget Sound. And there was video of the guy, flying around doing barrel rolls. And he eventually committed suicide by flying into one of the islands out in the Sound. And it was, of course, a very obvious case of suicide. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can do a Google search for it. You can even do a search for it here on YouTube. And see, people were like, what's going on? And people were using their phones to film it and everything else. But they had the air traffic control recordings of the air traffic controller talking to this pilot as he was in the plane. And he was a guy that did work at an airport there. But he had his issues. But if you do get to watch that video and you do get to see the transcript and get to listen to the air traffic controller talking to this guy, I think what it shows, everything that this pilot who ended up killing himself, the way he acted, what he said, was the complete opposite of what the public perception is of people who commit suicide. Because this guy is eventually what he did. Because if you listen to his words and everything, he's making jokes. He's talking about his flying ability. He is not delusional at all. He wasn't hallucinating or anything like that. He was in the clearest mind I think you can have. And he knew what he was going to do, and he was perfectly fine with it. Okay? And just from his name was Richard Russell, and he was married. I think he might have had some children, and he just decided that was the day. And he stole this plane, figured out how to fly it, and I took it up in the air, flew it around for a while, and then crashed it. But in the meantime, he was talking to air traffic control. They were trying to talk him down. They kind of got the idea he wanted to commit suicide. And he was just joking around with them, having a conversation with them, and he's saying, what, when I came up here, I didn't have any plans on, landing this thing. And I think that we have to remember that. I think that we too often think that people who commit suicide are, depressed and they're just negative. And this guy did have some negative things to say about things that were happening in his life. But I think the public perception of the way people act and think and everything else before they commit suicide is totally the opposite of what is usually the situation. And I think that we have to remember that by the time many of these people are about to commit suicide, they have thought about it for a long time and they're at peace with it. They are. And they're going to be happier being dead than alive, and that makes them happy. And that also, so it's something that I probably should have brought up a while ago, because suicide does come up sometimes in some of the cases that we talk about. But I urge you, when you have the time, to look up this stolen Alaskan Airlines situation and listen to what this guy was saying. And he was just minutes away from, diving that plane into an island and killing himself. And he was not crazy. He was not insane. He was not depressed. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was going to enjoy doing it. But I wanted to bring that up. I think it's been on my mind since we covered Jackson's case on Friday, being that, there could be the possibility that he did commit suicide. So I wanted to bring that up all to you. Another way to maybe learn a little bit more about suicide by listening to a person who was in the process of killing himself, and to hear his words and how he's joking around, etc. So I wanted to include that in this evening's discussion, so you can maybe research that and watch the video on it later. Elizabeth asks me, do you think MH370 was the result of pilot suicide? Elizabeth, I will tell you that I originally did. But since then, since it happened, when was that, 2016? Or maybe even further back than that. I've had Jeff West on the program. And is that his name? Okay, now I'm double. But I did interview the guy that 2014. Thank you, Elizabeth. I did have who I would consider to be the foremost expert on Jeff Wise. Thank you, Katie. Jeff West, almost. I had Jeff Wise on my program back in 2017, where we had a very detailed discussion, and I consider him to be the foremost expert on that disappearance. And Jeff does not believe it was pilot suicide, and so neither do I. He knows about everything more than I do. He is not a conspiracy theorist. I think he's using all the facts that are known to come to a different conclusion than most other people have. And remember, the people who were the experts said that the plane was down there in the southern Indian Ocean. Well, they went and searched down there, and it's not there. So it must be somewhere else. And I think, Elizabeth, maybe you don't know this, but Jeff Wise has 2 books out that you should definitely look up. Maybe get them on audible.com. Maybe that's a little cheaper than actually outright buying the book, or maybe ebook. But I got both of them on Audible, and they're both excellent. Jeff does the reading for both. And they're both excellent. And I think that you can learn as much as anybody by just listening or reading those books. And in the meantime, if you'd like to see even deeper discussions about Flight 370, then I would go to his website, jeffwise.net, and see all the discussions he's had with other people regarding the disappearance of Flight 370. And, he believes that the plane was hijacked. and that it was flown up into the area of Russia, Kazakhstan, in that area. And I'm not going to get into all the permutations of why he believes that, but he will, he can logically explain why that is. That's a lot to do with the messages that the plane was sending to satellites, and the satellites, the messages were coming back. It's very detailed. And no, not Diego Garcia. No, not Diego Garcia at all, Elizabeth. No, actually that's an island. Actually up onto the continent of Asia, up into the country of Kazakhstan. That is Jeff's belief. And he continues to try to prove this to this day. Yeah, Katie, I just saw that air disaster episode recently. Yes, Lufthansa flight, horrible. Hello, Suzanne. Horrible. But I do not believe that Flight 370 was a pilot suicide. I know very early on I did, but my mind has been changed. Let's talk a little bit now, being that this has been in the news, and I want you to know before I get into this, I am not an expert on this disappearance. I have to truthfully tell you that I've not taken a lot of interest in it, even though it's a case that's somewhat old. Really have not done a detailed, research into web sleuths or anywhere else looking at this disappearance. So before I talk about this, please remember that. But in the news in the last couple days, the disappearance of Kristin Smart has been out there. This girl who was at Cal Poly, went to a party, allegedly got walked home by this guy, and then she disappeared. He, of course, claims that, they parted ways and she was still alive, going into her dorm or whatever he says, and she disappeared. It reminds me a lot of another disappearance from Indiana. Can't remember her name either, but kind of the same thing, where she was out with friends and she got escorted home by some guy, and he says that he left her off in front of her dorm and then she disappeared. But that happened in the state of Indiana, but that's more recent. That's within like the last 10 years, whereas Kristin Smart's is a disappearance that's over 20 years old. But in multiple places, it says that there's going to be new news coming out soon. And, the FBI is involved, etc. Well, being that I have connections like this, and only because I've been doing this for as long as I've been doing it, I got to talk to Dennis Mahan today, and he is a guy who has been working on the Kristin Smart case for quite a while. He knows her parents, and if the name sounds familiar to you, he's actually been on the program twice, on Unfound twice. He was on for the Kent Jacobs disappearance in August of 2017, and then he came back later in 2018 for the disappearance of Kristen Modafferi, a disappearance in San Francisco, coincidentally. And but then he's also and because he's gotten to know both of those families very well, he also knows the Smart family very well. And I got to talk to him today. Lawrence Spear. Thank you, Elizabeth, for looking that up. Exactly right. Lawrence Spear was the girl that disappeared in Indiana. But I talked to Dennis today. Cannot tell you everything he told me because of some of the things were in confidence. But some of this, let's just put it this way. How can I put this? Some of this may be a little overblown, and it may be a reporter going forward with only maybe 1/4 of the information. I just want to warn you about this. Yes, Marcus, the woman who disappeared from Cal Poly. That's exactly right, Kristin Smart. And but Dennis is hopeful there is going to be actual new news that will be coming out soon. But some of the things that have been put in the story are a little, I wouldn't necessarily call them wrong. It's just a little overblown. So I have a little bit of an inside angle on it, and that is generally what Dennis told me. I'm sorry, I can't be any more specific than that. But Media, I listened to your Kristin Modafferi podcast. It was really good. Thank you, Media. That's very kind of you. So I'm not saying there isn't going to be news coming out, but maybe not quite in the form that you think. And I really don't know if it's going to be totally new news. From what I've known about the case and what Dennis told me today, I guess that the same guy who law enforcement has been looking at since the beginning, I guess he is still the main suspect. I can tell you that nothing Dennis told me today has changed that, but there's nothing saying that, it could be anything. What this new news, when it comes out, if it comes out, I'm not sure what it's going to be. I don't know what it's going to be, and I couldn't even guess. But I just wanted to tell you that maybe all the hubbub that the story has gotten about the FBI and everything, it's not quite correct. And I'm just going to leave it at that. But like I said, I don't know the disappearance, the nuts and bolts of the disappearance that well. It's not been one that really has gotten a lot of my attention in the last 20 years. Whereas on the other hand, for example, case like a disappearance like Jennifer Kesse has, even though we've not covered an Unfound, I feel like I know a lot more about her disappearance than I do about Kristin's. So there you go. So that's been in the news, and I'm just maybe going to kind of temper any expectations about the news that could be coming out. I'm not saying there's going to be news coming out, but if it does come out, you might want to temper your expectations a little bit. That's all I feel comfortable saying right now. Yep, Kristin Smart. Yeah, some people are sending me things here. Yep, and Carrie's sending me something now that is now at the San Francisco Chronicle. Carrie, thank you for sending me that. FBI, no agent spoke to Kristin Smart family in missing college student case. That's what I mean. Thank you, Carrie. Now, thank you. It's now public information that, like I said, a reporter kind of ran with something that wasn't quite true, as does happen. And we hear that a lot in these disappearance cases, and that's why many times when I talk to guests for the first time, we do go over articles that have been written about the disappearance, because I need to figure out what is true and what is not true, because these reporters often get things wrong. And I want to know where they got led astray, and I don't want to take anything for granted. So there you go. So Carrie, thank you for sending that to me, and thank you for posting it in the group. There you go. Let's move on to this. Somebody asked me to talk about the McStay family, because today, or maybe yesterday, Charles Merritt, the guy who was convicted of murdering the entire McStay family, the parents and the children, their remains were eventually found out in the desert very near the I-15 in California. And what's weird to me is that I used to drive right by that area all the time when I'd be driving to California. Either I had friends that lived in LA, and I had to do work down that way for a while when I lived in Las Vegas. So I used to go right by that area all the time. All the time. And if you remember, it was just sheer luck that their bodies were even discovered where they were. Of course, it was nowhere near where the McStays lived. Of course, many people thought that they might have crossed over into Mexico and San Diego, down into Tijuana. And there was that video that allegedly showed parents with their kids, and they believed that was McStay's walking into Mexico. But we now know that none of, that the truth. And that is that Charles Merritt, who was in business with the father, Merritt had been ripping them off and was hiding all these expenses and lying and everything else, and ended up killing the entire family because of it, just to cover it up. That's what happened. But today, for the sentencing part, after being convicted, he has been sentenced to death in California. But you should know that California is one of those states that still has the death penalty but never uses it anymore. That's why, like, for example, Charles Manson, even though he was sentenced to death, actually ended up dying of natural causes in California after being in jail for 40 years or whatever it was. So Charles Merritt has been convicted of those murders. He's been sentenced to death for those murders, but I can assure you he will never be executed for those murders, and so he will just spend the rest of his life in jail. I'm trying to think back, to my personal opinions, my personal opinion about what happened to the McStays. And I have to tell you, I wasn't sure what happened. I'm not saying that oh yeah, I was the guy that believed that, Charles Merritt killed him. I was not one of those people. But I will also tell you that I never believed that they went to Mexico either. I thought that there was a good chance they might have been murdered by somebody, or something happened, or maybe even the father lost his mind and, killed his wife and his kids and was on the run. Maybe so, some of those other choices. But I personally never believed that they went into Mexico. It just didn't make any sense to me at all. So even with the video and everything else. So, but, you just have to remember in a case like that the only reason this got solved was luck. There was nothing, no evidence, nothing that would have ever led police or any investigator, private or public, to go to that area where the remains were eventually found. Nothing. They would still be there had those motorcyclists or those off-roading people not come across the graves. Had that not happened, that case would still be unsolved. And you do, when you look back at a lot of these disappearances that are solved, it's a little disturbing how many of them are just solved by luck. Remains just stumbled upon. Because that's not a very reliable way to resolve these cases, just by luck. Elizabeth says, sad, the ultimate betrayal. Yep, it is sad. I knew they didn't go to Mexico either because the passports were in the safe, right? Yep. Kathy, Sheree says, Kathy, Merritt claimed he had a big heart problem when he was first arrested in 2014. Nope, he's still alive now. Elizabeth always thought they were murdered as well. Sheree only connected Charles because he left a hammer in the grave with some DNA on it, right? Yeah, that was stupid on his part, but just once again, complete luck that that case got solved, and we're very fortunate. So there's that. There's something in the news also that and you should know that I did not get many questions for tonight from the audience. So if there are any questions that are on your mind about anything, about, a case that we recently covered, or it doesn't even have to be true crime related, I'm open to those because I really did not get any questions except for the McStay question before tonight's show started. So if you'd like to send some questions to me, I can do that. And of course, before as usual, before this episode of this show is over, I will talk about Friday's program. What do we? Carrie says the McStay case is one example of the need of being very observant anytime you're out and about. True. Courtney, what kind of monster can beat a child to death? Disgusting. I know, Courtney. I know it. It's pretty sad. It just is. It just is. Kathy says, especially two little boys. I know. As Elizabeth says, Jennifer Kesse. What about Jennifer Kesse, Elizabeth? Please expound on that at least a little bit. I will give you my theory, but I've done that before, so I'll have to be pretty quick about it. In fact, I had a listener just email me within the last 5 days, maybe, asking me about that case, about that disappearance. So it seems to be in a lot of people's minds. So yeah, I haven't gotten any questions, but here's one from Antonia. Very good. Antonia, what do you think of the national park disappearances? David Polides has written 9 books. I think it's all crazy. Every single. I'm not saying that people don't disappear in national parks. They do. I'm not saying they don't. They do. But what you have to look at is this, and I'm not here. David Polides may know more about disappearances in national parks, but I know more about disappearances in general. And here's the way I look at it. The reason that people disappear in national parks, now I'm not saying a few of them aren't murders. They probably are. But you also have to remember that national parks in the United States, at least the United States, I'm not going to speak for Europe or anywhere else, but in the United States, they cover some of the roughest terrain in the United States. They're usually forests, or it's the Grand Canyon, with cliffs and rivers and wild animals and everything else. Okay, we have to realize that. Okay, a person going into a national forest is more dangerous than them walking down a street in their hometown. Okay. Secondly, one of the things, as we've learned now, is a lot of people, they get there and they think they're a great hiker when they're not. They have new equipment, they got new shoes, they got new GPS, they got a new tent, they got this, they got that, and everything. And some people just get too adventurous. And I believe that happens. It's not crazy to me that a bunch of people who don't have any outdoor experience go missing and disappear in the roughest terrain in the United States. Nobody should be surprised by that. Now, if some outdoors woman or man who's hiked around the world and gone to the Australian outback and the jungles of Africa and South America, now if one of them disappears in a national forest, then I might get a little concerned. But being that all of these people who disappear in these national parks are really silly city dwellers who go out and disappear in the roughest terrain that this world has to offer, is not surprising to me. In addition, as Sharia is saying, you have to, it seems like a lot of people are disappearing in our national parks. That number, whatever that number is, and I don't know what that number is, that number only means something if you can't compare it to the amount of people that visit our national parks on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. All right? Whether that number is 100 a year or 1 million a year, it only means something if you can compare it to how many people actually go in there. And if you do that, I think you're going to find that the disappearance rate is like 0.0001 or something like that. I'm not saying those lives don't matter. They do, all of them. I wish none of them happened. But you have to put it in the context of how many people actually go into our national parks. It'd be no different if I told you that in the United States, 50 people got killed flying last year. You'd be like, oh my gosh, 50 people. Well, 100 million people flew. So is that 50 number suspicious, or is it just just what's going to happen when people go in planes and people are imperfect and machines break and everything else. I'm not here to get into some disagreement with David Polides, but I do believe that he's kind of created his own cottage industry for that. He's written 9 books. Me, I'm all about solutions. I want less disappearances. Being that he's written 9 books about the same topic tells me, whereas I've written how many? 7 books? All of my 7 books are about different people. He's written 9 books about the same topic. It could be that he's just talking about this so it allows him to write more books. How about that? I'm not going to say that there haven't been some murders, but I do not believe there's some conspiracy theory. I don't believe that there's people just sitting out in national parks waiting for people to come in there and kill them and be these perfect deaths where there's no evidence or anything like that. I do not believe that for a second. Just like I don't believe in the smiley face killers. I don't believe that in either. Now, I agree with some people. I know people find it interesting, but I'm not in the interesting business. I'm in the solutions business. I don't present cases to you and things because I find them interesting. I present them to you because they're unsolved. So I just want you to keep that in mind as you're listening or reading whatever he's putting out there. That does it make sense to you? Jennifer K, let me go. How many Unfound books are available on Amazon? 7, Gail. You got my rants. Sorry, Gail, 8 books so far. Kathy, 8? I think it's 7. 6 books for season 1 and 1 book for season 2. I think it's 7, Kathy, but that's okay. I think Elizabeth. Okay, we'll get back to that, Elizabeth. Not everything has to be a big conspiracy. Carrie, that's exactly true. Christine says, I enjoy listening to David. Well, Christine, and I appreciate Christine as a new Patreon supporter. I know that you enjoy listening to him, but I'm more concerned about whether he's actually, I'm not saying he's not telling the truth. I'm not saying he's not lying about the numbers, but the numbers have to be compared to something. Now, if you want to say that, well, it's too many people, okay, make our national parks safer. The way you make them safer is don't let people go off on these paths that they shouldn't be on. Don't let, go off and just doing their own thing and suddenly they step off a cliff. That's going to go a lot further toward causing less deaths or disappearances in national parks than thinking that there's some serial killer out there killing all these people. This is dangerous terrain. I don't know what people expect. You go into dangerous terrain, some people are going to die and you're not going to find them. It's some of the thickest forests and everything in the world. Don't be surprised if you can't find these people. Now if they were all a desert, that would be different. Noah Pippin. I don't know Noah Kathy. Noah Pippin does not mean anything. You can get lost fast and hurt in the forest. Yes, Cherie, as Cherie said, Appalachian Trail has 3 million people walking through it every year. Got to figure the same odds for a population of 3 million. The numbers are actually less, though. Thank you, Cherie. He says a lot of them have taken off their shoes. Maybe some of them went there to commit suicide. Question for you, Ed. Do you believe Colleen Osborne was killed by Christopher Wilder? I'm sorry, Marcus, I don't know enough about that to comment. Renee, Ed, have you read or listened to any cases? Just curious. Read or listened to any cases? You're going to have to be a little more specific on that, Renee. Gail says, David Polides' books are very repetitive. That doesn't surprise me. Antonio, thank you for your response. I just don't like the fact that he sells his books off a Bigfoot website. It discredits his work, in my opinion. Well, if he sells his book off a Bigfoot website, that should be all you need to know. Here's what I know. I'll never be selling my books off a UFO website. Christine says I have to check out your books. All on Amazon, Christine, for sure. We can talk about Jennifer Kesse Elizabeth in a second. I just want to get a lot of messages that I've missed here. I've seen many cases where people in the wild or national forest have been found after lost or injured who had passed away from injury or starvation. Others were found injured, still alive. Yes. There are just so many options. Well, there are certainly options, Michelle. I'm not saying they're not options. And I can even tell you that I'm willing to say at least a few of the people who have disappeared in our national forests have been murdered. But that's only because of the odds and probabilities, not because there's any proof that there's some serial killer out there. Renee, now best line. Now, if it was in the desert, it'd be different. And what I mean by that, Renee, is there's nowhere to hide in a desert. There's nowhere to hide. And if you told me people were walking out into a desert and disappearing that was a national park, then I'd start thinking, but that's not what's happening. Died in Bob Marshall Wilderness. No, I just, once again, Kathy, don't know enough about it to comment. Elizabeth, very possible, was killed by, I know who Christopher Wilder is because we talked about him during the Tammy Leppard case. But that's about all I know, Elizabeth. So I don't want to go any further than that. It is comical tonight. I love it. All right. Elizabeth, Jennifer Kesse, very quickly. My opinion has always been, and I've known about Jennifer Kesse's disappearance since around the time it happened, because I think that the way I look at it all these years later is it became national news quite quickly. At the time, I lived in Las Vegas and I knew about it. My opinion has always been that she disappeared the night before and not the next morning. She disappeared on Monday night, not Tuesday morning. I do not believe that a migrant worker or migrant workers abducted her, kidnapped her, and killed her. I do not believe that. I could go through and I don't want to make a half hour on this. Here's my main reason for me believing that she was abducted or something happened to her the night before. She was she was in business, she was in realty, and what I think I know about people who were in the real estate business. She shut off her phone on Monday night, and I don't know the time off the top of my head. She shut her phone off on Monday night after she talked to her fiance. And I've been told that they had some sort of argument, and just two people who loved each other, living separately. Of course, they'd just coming back from that vacation together. She shut her phone off after that call. That phone was never turned on again. Now, think about it. She's in business. So if we're to believe that she was abducted on Tuesday morning, then we are forced to believe that she got up, picked out the clothes that she was going to wear for that day, took a shower, dried her hair, put on her makeup, ate breakfast, everything, which couple hour and a half, I don't know. And still on the way out, and if she got abducted while walking out to her car, she still had not turned on her phone. She got up, was up for a couple hours, and she hadn't even turned on her phone, even though she was walking out to her car and got abducted. Now, does that sound reasonable to you? It doesn't to me. I don't know anybody that has that kind of cell phone usage, not in when she disappeared in the mid-2000s, and certainly not today. My impression of people who are in business As soon as they get up in the morning, they turn on their phone. I never turn my phone off, ever, because I never know who's going to call me. I never turn my phone off, ever. I put it on vibrate, but I never turn it off. She turned hers off, never turned it back on again, even though she allegedly got up the next morning, did all those things that her parents say she did that she would normally do before she went to work. Didn't turn on her phone. So I continue to say, something happened the night before. Now, if you want me to go further into it, I can. A BA humming like 1045, thank you. Elizabeth, there were a dozen migrant workers on her complex, so? Her apartment complex was only 30% occupied. I am a landowner. Elizabeth, those are, I'm not here to argue with her, but so what if there were migrant workers working in her complex? So what? I'm not, are we supposed to suspect them just because they're illegal immigrants? Is that the only thing we have on them? Do we suspect them just because they're migrant workers? Because that doesn't sound very nice to me. That doesn't sound, very logical to me. I know that migrant workers commit crimes, but you know what? A lot of American citizens commit crimes too. In fact, American citizens commit way more crimes than migrant workers do. They commit way more murders than migrant workers do. So why don't we suspect American citizens? So if I wanted to go further into this, Elizabeth, I would say that my personal belief is that although Jennifer, whether it was her boyfriend or fiance, somebody's corrected me on that. I thought it was her fiance. I'm inclined to believe that she probably had another relationship with another guy. And she shut off her phone, as many people do who are in relationships. If they're going to see their mistress, they shut off their phone. And I think that all that stuff about picking out an outfit and her briefcase and everything being missing, I think that she was going to some other guy's house that night. And I think this guy was jealous that she spent that weekend before with this other guy. They got into a fight and he killed her. That's what I think happened. That's my personal opinion on it. But I base that on the phone usage because if anything we've learned about disappearances over the last 3.5 years, if you've been listening to the program closely, Unfound closely, is that if you can pinpoint when a person's phone was last used or turned off, that is usually when the disappearance happened or started. That's pretty a good rule of thumb to use in disappearances. Not perfect, but certainly a good one. Elizabeth, I've looked at the video. I've looked at the video of the guy walking away, or, some people even believe it's a woman. You can't see the person's face. I don't know. It's horrible luck that, that face is just blocked out by the bars of that fence. I'm not here to argue with you, Elizabeth. If you think that happened, then you do. I don't. I think I choose to believe that it wasn't a migrant worker. She was not abducted on going out to her car that morning. It's Elizabeth, if it was a worker from that building, they would have solved this case 10 years ago. They would have solved it 10 years ago. So that's not the case. And I think as I've been very vocal on this show, I think the Kesses have gone, have not gone about all of this the right way. And I think that I'm now, after 160 cases, in a position to say that because I know so many families now. And I've talked to them personally about the interactions with the police and private investigators and everything else. The Kesses have gone about this the wrong way. Elizabeth, if you want to believe that, you can. There's no proof of that, except to say just because migrant workers were in the complex. You know, how do you explain the phone not being turned on the next day? Because the Kesses have been more than straightforward in saying they believe that she got up, got a shower, picked out her clothes, did everything, and then she got abducted on the way out to her car. Why didn't she turn her phone on? Every businesswoman in the United States turns their phone on as soon as they get up in the morning. Oh no. So let's move on. That's Elizabeth, you and I are just going to have to disagree. I do want to talk about this. There's this mother. You know, talk about, you know, a bit of a stumper. Maybe David Polides can look into this. A mother vanished in Belize. She was there with her boyfriend and maybe some other family members. They were on a catamaran cruise, and out on this island camping, and then they got up the next day and she was gone. Now, this is a real stumper. The island is not like Hawaii or Greenland or something like that. In fact, this Rendezvous Cay is what is called. I saw a article that says it's only 1,400 square feet. Well, your average American house is only 1,400 square feet. That's not right. I think that what they meant to say is it's 1,400 feet in circumference. So it's not that big. It's like a quarter mile around. And still somehow this woman disappeared. So that is a real stumper, that a woman who's out there camping with other people, that's the only boat there, and they wake up the next morning and she's gone. Now you can go onto YouTube, where we are right now, and you can see some videos of people at Rendezvous Cay doing scuba diving, and you'll get a good sense for what that little tiny little island looks like. There's no place to hide. So I'm not sure what to make of this right now. Maybe she went for a moonlight swim and drowned, and they'll eventually find her body out in the ocean somewhere. And I think also, though, some other people are going to be suspicious of her boyfriend that she was with. Of course, he's claiming I have no idea what happened, and that very well may be the case. Because even if he did do something to her, how could he hide her on an island that's only, you know, a quarter mile in circumference? I mean, you could walk around the whole thing in 10 minutes. So that is a real stumper. But maybe some of you saw that in the news. That's gotten quite a bit of attention. Elizabeth, I did not write down this woman's name. Carrie, I don't know about missing scuba gear. All I know is what caught my attention is she disappeared from an island that's only 1,400 feet around. So, you know, if you want to know, if you can't do the math in your head, a quarter mile is 1,320 feet. And so if you were to take a quarter mile and turn it into a send, that's how big the island is. The area inside is how big the island was. Not very big at all. Not a lot of choices, but I'm guessing that they'll probably solve this case, and I'm hoping there wasn't foul play involved. I've been to Belize, and had this disappearance occurred on the mainland, then I might think it was murder or something like that, foul play. But being this, you know, happened in this little tiny island, then I'm less inclined to believe that, unless she and her boyfriend did have some tiff. Elizabeth, I did not write it in my notes, so I don't know. I didn't write her name down. So maybe all of you can check out that, including checking out Allison McKenzie. There you go. Carrie, thank you for that. There you go, Elizabeth. Allison McKenzie. So let's move on to this Friday's. Did I miss anything up here? Let me go. Marcus says, I don't believe this was a stranger objection regarding Jennifer Kesse, but I don't believe she was having a relationship on the side. Perfectly fine with you believing that, Marcus. I have no problem with that. Most stranger abductions extremely rare. That's true. Kathy's saying I never turned my phone off. Mine has only been off if dead or I'm at a special event. I think in the end regarding Jennifer Kesse is that the cell phone information tells us all we need to know, even though we haven't seen the cell phone records as to who she was calling, texting, etc. I want to talk about this Friday's case. As I've said at least a few times, I enjoy covering all these cases. But I think all of you know that the ones that aren't as well known are special to me. And the ones where they aren't on Charlie Project, aren't on NamUs, are very, very, very special to me. And one of the ones that I think off the top of my head is Dal Phillips, one that a disappearance we covered in late 2017, I believe. Well, we have another one of those this Friday, and it's the disappearance of Patrick Reed. And of course, if you are a golf fan, you know that Patrick Reed is also the name of what I would call a controversial golfer who won the Masters last year. And it kind of makes this case a little tough to research. The other thing that makes it tough to research is that in Patrick's case, nobody has ever filed a missing persons report. So that's the reason you will not find it on NamUs, and you will not find it on the Charlie Project. And that's why no articles have ever written about it. But you can thank, as you would certainly suspect, Emily, my assistant, for finding out about Patrick's disappearance and contacting his sister Charlotte. And I interviewed her today yesterday. I interviewed her yesterday for Friday's episode with the disappearance of Patrick Reed. What makes this disappearance tough is that it's from Houston, Texas, but we do not have an exact disappearance date. The closest that his sister could guess is late 1998. So it's over 21 years old, and there's not been a missing persons report or anything done for it, but I can assure you Charlotte will be doing that now. And the episode is called Something Smells Fishy. And so in the intro to this episode, I talk about how we suspect things, but we can't prove them. Because something in our intuition, our sixth sense, we know that something doesn't sound right, but we don't know why it doesn't sound right. Or we may know that it doesn't sound right, and we have suspicions, but we can't prove them. And that's the way Patrick Reed's disappearance is because he was living with some other people on Kowis Street, Kowis, in Houston. And the story is that he went to Florida with a guy whose name was CD. His full name is Charles Napier. They were hitchhiking to Florida, and Charles came back, but Patrick didn't. And these other people that were living there never filed a police report. Charlotte, never filed a police report. And everybody just threw their hands up in the air. And Charles himself has never offered up any explanation as to why he returned from Florida, but Patrick didn't either. In fact, you will hear how Charlotte tried to talk to Charles, and he didn't want to talk about it. So that is the disappearance for this Friday. Not a lot to go on, but I think the have to look at this disappearance is that I think this is going to spur Charlotte to go file a police report, even though I know the Houston Police Department is going to look cross-eyed at her like, what, 22 years old, and you now want to file a missing police report? Well, she has to do that. Then we can get NamUs started. We can get Patrick put on the Charlie Project. We can get the DNA sample collected, because it very well could be that Patrick is out there somewhere. His remains have been found, whether through foul play or, natural causes, and there's no DNA to match it with. So that could be going on right now, and we just don't know about it. So had a serious talk with Charlotte about getting that stuff done in the year 2020. It's very important. So that is the case, and you're going to hear about a relationship with Patrick and the things that were going on in his life, and why the missing person report never got done. You're going to hear about all of that in my interview with Charlotte, his sister. No, Kathy says, no kidding, controversial golfer. Kathy knows her golf. I know Elizabeth. I do know about how her brother was at her apartment. I know about all the people that stayed there in the days before. Yes. Sounds like a giant puzzle, Carrie. It is. Marcus, does his family have a Facebook page? They do not, but I think the way Emily, his disappearance was posted on some missing persons page on Facebook, and that's how Emily discovered about found out about this particular disappearance, Marcus. But no, that is something else that I surely talked to Charlotte about getting that done as well. All these things have to be done. Carrie, I will surely let you know. In fact, I'm sure that I am going to make that happen. Carrie, I'm sure that I will put you in touch with Charlotte so you can help her with that. Hello, Unchained. That's interesting. Hopefully the interview will jumpstart the case. That's what we do, Marcus. That's what we hope with every case we cover. So, and I think it's very helpful to Charlotte, now that that she knows me and has access, to the people that I know, of course, including Carrie and others that can help her with NamUs and everything else. So I'm sure that Patrick's disappearance will become much more prominent in the coming weeks and months. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Just like Dow Phillips, who, when we first found out about it, no NamUs, nothing. And before long, he was on NamUs. He was on the Charlie Project. And even to the point, where other family members are complaining, about, maybe having a little too much attention, if you know what I mean. So, so hopefully we can do that with Patrick Reed's case. Maybe another disappearance that's like that was Christopher Hyde's, kind of the same thing. All right, we've been going, wow, hour and 15 minutes, actually an hour and 20 minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up. I hope you liked all the new lights. This is the way the show is going to look like from now on. I hope you enjoyed me with instead of using Wirecast, just using webcam on YouTube. Talked about how cold it was today. Talked about Kristin Smart. Talked about the newsletter. Talked about videos. Of course, Shireen wants me to mention the think tank. Yes, please. I know I see many of the think tank members in here, but we do it every Sunday night. And we talk about the case from the preceding Friday. We throw around a lot of theories. Of course, we don't do theories on the regular Friday program. And that information eventually goes right back to my guest, and they can use that information, whatever we happen upon, for their own uses. And it's the only kind of thing in the world, the only program in the world that does this, that gets together after the episode has come out, brings a small group of people together to talk about that disappearance in depth with the idea of coming up with some new ways to move the case forward. We're the only group that does that in the think tank. If that sounds interesting to you, go to Patreon and sign up at least at the $12 a month level. And we'd love to see you there. And you get a lot of other perks besides that. So please look into it. Patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. We talked about how I record phone calls now, interviews now. Talked about the stolen Alaskan Airlines plane for the purposes of talking about suicide. Talked about the Jackson Miller poll. Talked about the McStay family. Talked about this woman who went missing in Belize. And then I previewed this Friday's program, The Disappearance of Patrick Reed, an episode that I'm calling Something Smells Fishy. All right, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for giving Unfound some of your time tonight. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, they do learn a lot. Unfound 2020 looks great. I love that. Just go to patreon.com. You have to sign up to be a Patreon supporter, Elizabeth, to be part of the think tank. See you, Jasmine. See everybody else. Thank you so much. It's been fun tonight. Good night.